All right. Well, hello, young lovers, wherever you are. This is Tad. Not everything, just this person sitting here, Tad. Glad we got that straightened out. I have no claims to omnipresence. I do, however, have claim to this particular tiny, tiny little tubule in the intertubes. And at the moment, it is 7 o'clock in California. That is 7 p.m. for those of you easily confused by time zones, international boundaries, the dateline, etc. I know I am one of them, so that is not meant as opprobrium. That is, in fact, meant as welcome to the club. But it is 7 p.m. here Sunday on the west coast of the Americas, the left coast, as some people call it. The worst coast, as some other people call it, although I don't know who that would be, since most of the people who despise California also despise the East Coast as well. Don't ask me why. I despise no parts of nothing. I am completely in favor. And when it comes to the United States, I have friends and correspondents and all that in virtually every state and have visited many, many, many of them. Not every single one. I still don't think I've been to the Dakotas, but I have been to many, many others. So, and I like them all. I like them all. I like the differences. I like the cultural diversity of every single place. And of course, I am not limiting this to the United States. I feel that way about other parts of the world I've visited too. The world is simply too big and too interesting to spend any time criticizing one part for not being as good as another. You can criticize actions, but it's kind of like the way that people always used to think that everybody in the past was more primitive than people are now, when in fact what it was is they just first of all hadn't achieved the same level of technology for various reasons, because things hadn't been invented yet. But it was in fact the people in the past who invented all the really important things like language and art and the wheel and the use of fire and all kinds of things. So I always find it hilarious. I mean, and I'm not just talking about the real crazy people like the ancient aliens types who strongly believe, oh, just jump, cat. I see you. That's PJ back there. It's not just the ancient alien people who are absolutely nuts in most cases, who are all about like, well, primitive people, blah, 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 couldn't do this. They don't know anything about people. People have been phenomenally, what's the word I'm looking for? That resourceful. Have been phenomenally resourceful since forever. I mean, and not even just Homo sapiens, but Neanderthals, as far as we know now, may have well, they certainly did do art and may have had all kinds of other things, but we know that they also took care of the sick and old in their own tribes. Now, Neanderthals are not our direct ancestors. They were another branch off the tree, but close enough to us that the two species could intermix. And but that it's ludicrous when you hear people talking about the past as though they were all a bunch of dummies, and so anyway, I feel the same way about everywhere in the world, which is that people human beings just went out and flowed across the entire world in a fairly small matter of time after they left Africa about 70,000 years ago, and really literally wound up almost within 50,000 years or so, wound up almost everywhere on every continent, made livings there, still do in almost all cases, and as a result, that they had done amazing things in amazing places and found ways to make things work. Oh, this stupid thing has gone out of focus again. All right, here is the hand. I feel like I'm trying to calm a horse or something. Just hello. Okay, I don't know what you're doing. Maybe if I get in really close. There we go. I hope you guys can see this stuff on your ends, because otherwise you must just think I'm crazy when I just suddenly stop and start leaning into my webcam. Anyway, so humans all over the world have come up with solutions to where they lived, and using whatever they could in the way of domestic animals, in the way of local resources, both food resources, mineral resources, all kinds of things. So the idea of, one group of people in the past being more primitive than more modern people, or one people in one part of the world being more primitive than people in other parts of the world is just it's ignorant, basically. Anyway, I don't know why I got off on that, but I did. So just I guess I've just been watching a lot of anthropology stuff lately, and Deb and I are both fascinated by anthropology, among other things, archaeology, biology, cosmology. We are joyful idiots about all of it, in the sense that we love it and we're fascinated by it, but we don't pretend to be experts, nor could we. We don't speak the language in the sense of like the mathematics necessary to truly understand cosmology or physics or any number of things. But we're fascinated by them, and I always like to know what's apparently going on in the different fields of science. Not because I intend ever to do anything with it, although every now and then I do write something science fiction-y, but more just because it's fascinating to learn more about how the world works at all times. Anyway, speaking of how the world works, not much to report this week. As I said earlier today, or way earlier today, 1 o'clock in the morning my time, working on The Splintered Sun, beginning to kind of push some of the pieces into place so I have a better idea of how I'm going to tell the story. So I'm just kind of doing individual bits right now, and then trying to decide if I need other bits between them to string them together, and if so, how. Just that kind of writer's stuff. Signing. I said it in the past. I won't go through it all again. I'm very happy that people want any of my books signed. And I have signed many books during my career, and I'm thrilled by that. But there are times when you're sitting there just going over and over and over again, writing your signature and running out of ink and tossing out a pen and picking up another pen and just writing and going like, I wonder how much my wrist is going to hurt by the time I've emptied this pen. There are times when I kind of say like, I wish I was doing something else right at the moment, something that used a little bit more of my creativity. Although if you've seen my signature, it's fairly creative. So at least I have that I can look at. Anyway, anything else? Now, dogs generally well. Still waiting to hear. Johnny had a bit of a weird turn several days back. I went to the emergency vet, but he seems fine. They didn't recommend anything for him, and we're waiting for his second blood results just to see if there's any kind of problem. We think he ate something he shouldn't have eaten out in the backyard, but it's very hard to tell, because when we say backyard, we're talking about a portion of the large chunk of land we live on, the portion that he has access to. And it's at this time of the year, it's very overgrown. We're just about to get it all cut back again because, it just grows from no matter what. And it's a bit of a fire hazard. So that's what's going on here. Dogs basically fine. The cats you will see from time to time moving around behind me. Had a lovely night last night. I think I mentioned that on the broadcast. Last night's broadcast, I'm sure I mentioned it because I had just come back from that, only an hour and a half or so ahead of the reading, but had a very nice time with a bunch of old high school friends and caught up on a lot of stuff. But they're people I liked in high school, and praises be, they're people I still like. They're very much still the same people, and they are. I say this, I'm saying it because it's funny, but not because I really believe it. It just shows what a smart person I am, that I hung around with such funny, cool people back in high school days, and that we stayed in touch with each other, more or less, and every now and then we get to see each other. So that was really nice, and we had a very, very cool get-together. Not all of them did I only know in high school. Some of them I've seen repeatedly over the years. But it was a good hang, as we say. It was a very good hang, and I was regretful to have to leave and drive back over the hill from the Silicon Valley side to the Santa Cruz side to get home in time to do this. But then again, I was going to be able to hang with you guys, and that's pretty cool too. So no complaints. So what else? I'm saying too much. That's always a sign. Let me check and see who is on the things. I see. Oh, good. Okay, good. Let's see if we can get here. I see Tash is here. I see Ray is here. Hello, Ray. Good to see you, buddy. Ivan, my good friend Ivan, who goes back that far also and is also one of the people I'm very glad to still be in touch with. Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. That is Jeremy, the hero guy who's done so much work for me on the books. Mr. Unangst. I'm giving you the eyebrow. Isaac. Hello, Isaac. Good to see you again. Emily. Hello. A pleasure. I started the book, Emily. I haven't had a chance to do much more than that, but I just wanted to let you know I have started it. Tim. A pleasure. That's Tim Speckins. Tracy. Hello. Good to see you. Claudia. Kelly. And Christy. Okay, too many K's there all in a row. I'm easily confused. Kelly Kenrick and Christy Sanders. And Susan Shamblin, which is a nice little bit of going to a different alliteration. I'm very proud of you. Anyway, oh, and Mr. Durfee, hello, good to see you, sir. Real pleasure. He's just left a comment, and I have no idea what the comment situation is here. And Chris Vandal, good to see you too. So a pleasure, as always, to get to spend some time with you. I am going to be continuing to read from The Wind in the Willows. As I think I've mentioned before, but I'm going to briefly... Oh, there's a cat right behind me. That large magisterial lump of cat flesh is PJ. PJ and TJ. I told my daughter 1,000 times I really wish she'd pick different names for the cats because it took me weeks to continuously or at least consistently get the names right. Anyway, but I have become their second keeper, and they live down here with me, which is all fine except for the fact that I am sneezing constantly. So I'm going to have to come up with some solutions since this is my work area, and I cannot write if I am conversed and dripping various kinds of mucus over my keyboard. That will not fly. So, but otherwise, no complaints. We're all good and we're all fine here. Anything else I wanted to mention? Not really. Just another busy week and a busy year and a busy lifetime, in whatever you want to call it. Just staying out of trouble as best as possible. I can see there's going to be like cat things sticking out of my head. All right, he's jumped off now. So with that, let me continue with The Wind in the Willows, and I will explain to you something that I mentioned briefly before, but I'm going to mention again, which is that this chapter, which we're in the middle of right now, which mostly concerns Rat, the water rat, which, by the way, are not actually rats, interestingly enough. The water rat, as displayed in Wind in the Willows and as talked about in general, certainly in Europe, is not in fact a rat. It is a vole. It is a vole. I'm pretty sure about that. Anybody wants to can look me up and see if I'm wrong. I am very, very happy to be corrected on points of fact because, like many writers, I suspect I am, as I often say, I am a mile wide and an inch deep, meaning I know a lot of things in kind of limited detail. I'm more a collector of information than certainly an expert in anything. I guess at this point I'm pretty close to an expert in writing fantasy novels. But beyond that, I'm not an expert in anything. I have a lot of things that I have interests in, and they show up in my work. And as I mentioned, Deb and I are science buffs, so we love to keep up with what's going on in various fields that interest us. But I'm always willing to be corrected, especially now that I'm older and I'm not, I feel no compunction to be right all the time in the same way I probably did when I was 15 or 19 or something like that. I know I'm not right all the time. I know that there are many things I do not know, and I am very happy to learn them. And that's probably one of the most annoying things about hanging out with me is that I'm constantly asking questions about so why do birds do this? What mechanism makes them do this, or what allows certain kinds of things to happen in the construction of the Earth's mantle, or and then I go and look them up and try and find out what happens. But I'll do it right in the middle of a perfectly nice conversation about something, and I'll suddenly snag on something somebody said, and I really want to know why. Why is that true? Is it true? Or is it just something everybody says? Anyway, so back to the book. Wind in the Willows, chapter whatever it is, 10 or 11 or something. It's called Wayfarers All, this chapter. And like the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, apparently it was written after most of the stories were already put together that make up the other chapters. In other words, Kenneth Grahame told a lot of these as stories to, I believe, his son, who had a lot of health issues. But then after he wanted to put them together in a book, he added the Piper at the Gates of Dawn, which we've already read, and he added the Wayfarers All chapter, which we're in the middle of now. And they are distinctly different in terms of what they're doing. And they are there, it seems, as much as anything else, to add a sort of philosophical breadth to the books. And I won't babble more than that, because that's all you really need to think for yourself about them. It is a children's book, but it's not just a children's book. And that's one of the reasons I love this book so much. I first encountered it as a child, having it read to me. But I've been back to it many times over the years. And there's just a lot of good stuff. Good stuff. Anyway, so Wayfarers All begins with Rat, the water rat, as the fall has come on, or the end of the summer and the beginning of the fall, and the local animals who migrate every year are beginning to think about migrating and get into their migratory mode. And Rat, who is a year-round resident and is kind of a conservative in that way, doesn't like that they're all getting ready to leave, and he's out talking to them, various birds and others, and the field mice, saying, well, why do you have to go? Why don't you just stay here? And they're giving him various reasons and telling him various things. But during the course of a group of birds telling him about how this kind of unconscious or subconscious need to do the next thing, which in this case would be to go south, and then that too will change, and they will want to come back. But it's the urge to go to the south, to fly south, to feel the warm sun on their backs, et cetera, et cetera. And this is actually worked on Rat a little bit, where he is a little bit not confused, but he is a little bit troubled by this idea, because suddenly, for the first time, he's begun to think about this as well. So that is where I'm going to start reading. So he has just finished talking to the birds, the swallows. They're actually swallows, which, if you know, are in fact birds. Okay. They fell a-twittering among themselves once more, and this time their intoxicating babble was of violet seas, tawny sands, and lizard-haunted walls. Restlessly, the rat wandered off once more, climbed a slope that rose gently from the north bank of the river, and lay looking out toward the great ring of downs that barred his vision further southwards. His simple horizon, hitherto, his mountains of the moon, his limit behind which lay nothing he had cared to see or to know. Today, to him, gazing south, with new-born need stirring in his heart, the clear sky over their long, low outline seemed to pulsate with promise. Today, the unseen was everything, the unknown the only real fact of life. On this side of the hills was now the real blank. On the other lay the crowded and colored panorama that his inner eye was seeing so clearly. What seas lay beyond, green, leaping, and crested? What sun-bathed coasts, along with the white villas, glittered against the olive woods? What quiet harbors thronged with gallant shipping, bound for purple islands of wine and spice, islands set low in languorous waters? He rose and descended riverwards once more, then changed his mind and sought the side of the dusty lane. There, lying half buried in the thick, cool underhedge tangle that bordered it, he would muse on the metal road and all the wondrous world that it led to, on all the wayfarers, too. Speaking of animals, I don't know if you can hear Johnny there. Clearly somebody has just arrived with something upstairs. On all the wayfarers, too, that might have trodden it, and the fortunes and adventures they had gone to seek, or found unseeking, out there, beyond, beyond. Footsteps fell on his ear, and the figure of one that walked somewhat wearily came into view, and he saw that it was a rat, and a very dusty one. The wayfarer, as he reached him, saluted with a gesture of courtesy that had something foreign about it, hesitated a moment, then with a pleasant smile turned from the track and sat down by his side in the cool herbage. He seemed tired, and the rat let him rest, unquestioned, understanding something of what was in his thoughts, knowing, too, the value all animals attach at times to mere silent companionship, when the weary muscles slacken and the mind marks time. Hang on, let me tilt that a little bit. There we go. The wayfarer was lean and keen-featured and somewhat bowed at the shoulders. His paws were thin and long, his eyes much wrinkled at the corners, and he wore small gold earrings in his neatly set, well-shaped ears. His knitted jersey was of a faded blue. His breeches, patched and stained, were based on a blue foundation, and his small belongings that he carried were tied up in a blue cotton handkerchief. When he had rested a while, the stranger sighed, sniffed the air, and looked about him. "That was clover, that warm whiff on the breeze," he remarked. "And those are cows we hear cropping the grass behind us and blowing softly between mouthfuls. There is a sound of distant reapers, and yonder rises a blue line of cottage smoke against the woodland. The river runs somewhere close by, for I hear the call of the moorhen, and I see by your build that you're a freshwater mariner. Everything seems asleep, and yet going on all the time. It is a goodly life that you lead, friend. No doubt the best in the world, if only you're strong enough to lead it." "Yes, it's the life, the only life to live," responded the water rat, dreamily and without his usual wholehearted conviction. "I did not say exactly that," replied the stranger cautiously, "but no doubt it's the best. I've tried it, and I know. And because I've just tried it, 6 months of it, and know it's the best, here am I, footsore and hungry, tramping away from it, tramping southward, following the old call back to the old life, the life which is mine and which will not let me go." "Is this then yet another of them?" mused the rat. And where have you just come from?" he asked. He hardly dared to ask where he was bound for he seemed to know the answer only too well. "Nice little farm," replied the wayfarer briefly. "Up along in that direction." He nodded northwards. "Never mind about it. I had everything I could want, everything I had any right to expect of life, and more. And here I am. Glad to be here, all the same, though. Glad to be here. So many miles further on the road, so many hours nearer to my heart's desire." His shining eyes held fast to the horizon, and he seemed to be listening for some sound that was wanting from that inland acreage, vocal as it was with the cheerful music of pasturage and farmyard. "You are not one of us," said the water rat, "nor yet a farmer, nor even, I should judge, of this country." "Right," replied the stranger. "I am a seafaring rat, I am, and the port I originally hailed from is Constantinople, though I'm a sort of foreigner there, too, in a manner of speaking. You will have heard of Constantinople, friend, a fair city, and an ancient and glorious one. And you may have heard, too, of Sigurd, king of Norway, and how he sailed thither with 60 ships, and how he and his men rode up through the streets all canopied in their honor with purple and gold, and how the emperor and empress came down and banqueted with him on board his ship. When Sigurd returned home, many of his Northmen remained behind and entered the emperor's bodyguard, and my ancestor, a Norwegian born, stayed behind too, with the ships that Sigurd gave the emperor. Seafarers we have ever been, and no wonder. As for me, the city of my birth is no more my home than any pleasant port between there and the London River. I know them all, and they know me. Set me down on any of their quays or foreshores, and I am home again. I suppose you go great voyages, said the water rat with growing interest. Months and months out of sight of land, and provisions running short, and allowanced as to water, and your mind communing with the mighty ocean and all that sort of thing. By no means, said the sea rat frankly. Such a life as you describe would not suit me at all. I'm in the coasting trade, and rarely out of sight of land. It's the jolly times on shore that appeal to me as much as any seafaring. Oh, those southern seaports, the smell of them, the riding lights at night, the glamour. Well, perhaps you have chosen the better way, said the water rat, but rather doubtfully. Tell me something of your coasting, then, if you have a mind to, and what sort of harvest an animal of spirit might hope to bring home from it, to warm his latter days with gallant memories by the fireside. For my life, I confess to you, feels to me today somewhat narrow and circumscribed. My last voyage, began the sea rat, that landed me eventually in this country, bound with high hopes for my inland farm, will serve as a good example of any of them, and indeed as an epitome of my highly colored life. Family troubles, as usual, began it. The domestic storm cone was hoisted, and I shipped myself on board a small trading vessel bound from Constantinople by classic seas, whose every wave throbs with a deathless memory, to the Grecian islands and the Levant. Those were golden days and balmy nights. And here's a picture of, the sea rat. There we go. There's the sea rat climbing on board a ship, presumably in Constantinople. Those were golden days and balmy nights. In and out of harbor all the time, old friends everywhere, sleeping in some cool temple or a ruined cistern during the heat of the day, feasting and song after sundown under great stars set in a velvet sky. Thence we turned and coasted up the Adriatic, its shores swimming in an atmosphere of amber, rose, and aquamarine. We lay in wide landlocked harbors. We roamed through ancient noble cities, until at last one morning, as the sun rose royally behind us, we rode into Venice, down a path of gold. Oh, Venice is a fine city, wherein a rat can wander at his ease and take his pleasure, or, when weary of wandering, can sit at the edge of the Grand Canal at night, feasting with his friends when the air is full of music and the sky full of stars, and the lights flash and shimmer on the polished steel prows of the swaying gondolas, packed so that you could walk across the canal on them from side to side. And then the food. Do you like the shellfish? Well, we won't linger over that now. He was silent for a time, and the water rat, silent too and enthralled, floated on dream canals and heard a phantom song pealing high between vaporous gray, wave-lapped walls. Southwards we sailed again at last, continued the sea rat, coasting down the Italian shore till finally we made Palermo. And there I quitted for a long, happy spell on shore. I never stick too long on one ship. One gets narrow-minded and prejudiced. Besides, Sicily is one of my happy hunting grounds. I know everybody there, and their ways just suit me. I spent many jolly weeks in the island, staying with friends up country. When I grew restless again, I took advantage of a ship that was trading to Sardinia and Corsica, and very glad I was to feel the fresh breeze and the sea spray in my face once more. But isn't it very hot and stuffy down in the hold, I think you call it? asked the water rat. The seafarer looked at him with the suspicion of a wink. I'm an old hand, he remarked with much simplicity. The captain's cabin's good enough for me. It's a hard life by all accounts, murmured the rat, sunk in deep thought. For the crew it is, replied the seafarer gravely, again with the ghost of a wink. From Corsica, he went on, I made use of a ship that was taking wine to the mainland. We made a lassio in the evening, lay to, hauled up our wine casks, and hove them overboard, tied one to the other by a long line. Then the crew took to the boats and rowed shorewards, singing as they went, drawing after them the long bobbing procession of casks, like a mile of porpoises. On the sands they had horses waiting, which dragged the casks upon the steep streets of the little town, with a fine rush and clatter and scramble. When the last cask was in, we went and refreshed and rested and sat late into the night, drinking with our friends. And next morning I was off to the great olive woods for a spell and a rest. And here, whoops, I have to lean aside to be able to see this. That is the water rat, the sea rat on a pier. I suppose that's supposed to be Alessio. You can see it's split in the middle by the way the book is printed. For now, I was off to the great olive woods for a spell and a rest. For now I had done with islands for the time, and ports and shipping were plentiful, so I led a lazy life among the peasants, lying and watching them work, or stretched high on the hillside, with the blue Mediterranean far below me. And so at length, by easy stages, and partly on foot, partly by sea, to Marseille, and the meeting of old shipmates, and the visiting of great ocean-bound vessels, and feasting once more. Talk of shellfish. Why, sometimes I dream of the shellfish of Marseille, and wake up crying. And there is the sea rat and friends in a speakeasy or dive, I suppose, in Marseille. See if I can get that to focus in. I love Ernest Shepard's drawings. That's why I'm trying so hard to share them with you. Come on, there we go. Perfect. That reminds me, said the polite water rat. You happened to mention that you were hungry, and I ought to have spoken earlier. Of course you will stop and take your midday meal with me. My hole is close by. It is some time past noon, and you are very welcome to whatever there is. Now I call that kind and brotherly of you, said the sea rat. I was indeed hungry when I sat down, and ever since I inadvertently happened to mention shellfish, my pangs have been extreme. But couldn't you fetch it along out here? I am none too fond of going under hatches unless I'm obliged to, and then while we eat I could tell you more concerning my voyages and the pleasant life I lead. At least it is very pleasant to me, and by your attention I judge it commends itself to you. Whereas if we go indoors, it is 100 to 1 that I shall presently fall asleep. That is indeed an excellent suggestion, said the water rat, and hurried off home. There he got out the luncheon basket and packed a simple meal, in which, remembering the stranger's origin and preferences, he took care to include a yard of long French bread, a sausage out of which the garlic sang, some cheese which lay down and cried, and a long-necked, straw-covered flask. Let me read that last bit. And a long-necked, straw-covered flask containing bottled sunshine shed and garnered on far southern slopes. Thus laden, he returned with all speed, and blushed for pleasure at the old seaman's commendations of his taste and judgment, as together they unpacked the basket and laid out the contents on the grass by the roadside. The sea rat, as soon as his hunger was somewhat assuaged, continued the history of his latest voyage, conducting his simple hearer from port to port, of Spain landing him at Lisbon, Oporto, and Bordeaux, introducing him to the pleasant harbors of Cornwall and Devon, and so up the channel to that final quayside where, landing after winds long contrary, storm-driven and weather-beaten, he had caught the first magical hints and heraldings of another spring, and fired by these had sped on a long tramp inland, hungry for the experiment of life on some quiet farmstead, very far from the weary beating of the sea. Spellbound and quivering with excitement, the water rat followed the adventurer, league by league, over stormy bays, through crowded roadsteads, across harbor bars on a racing tide, up winding rivers that hid their busy little towns around a sudden turn, and left him, with a regretful sigh, planted at his dull inland farm, about which he desired to hear nothing. By this time their meal was over, and the seafarer, refreshed and strengthened, his voice more vibrant, his eyes lit with a brightness that seemed caught from some far-away sea beacon, filled his glass with the red and glowing vintage of the south, and, leaning towards the water rat, compelled his gaze and held him, body and soul, while he talked. Those eyes were of the changing foam, streaked gray-green of leaping northern seas. In the glass shone a hot ruby that seemed the very heart of the south, beating for him who had courage to respond to its pulsation. The twin lights, the shifting gray and the steadfast red, mastered the water rat and held him bound, fascinated, powerless. And here's a picture. Whoops. How do we get that around right? There we go. Nope, still wrong. Come on. I'm going to learn how to do this one day so I can figure out this backward-forward photo mirror thing. But anyway, just want you to observe while we're waiting for it to click into place a little better and be clearer. Again, one of the great things about Shepard is while he's drawing this completely fantastical book about animals that wear clothes and can talk. Sorry, I'm still trying to get this into focus here. Animals that wear clothes and can talk. At the same time, he's treating the animals perfectly realistically, and although for some reason I can't get that to focus in properly. There we go. You can see on my left anyway, the left side of the screen, the sea rat and the water rat to the right, who is actually a vole. And you can really see the two different animals, and that they are not both rats, that they are two different kinds of animals. And despite the kind of fantastic nature of it, I think it's another thing that's really charming about Ernest Shepard's drawings and why they work so well, because he's really, really trying to make things as realistic as possible in this world of rats, voles in rowboats, and moles with dusters, and badgers with boot scrapers. So where were we? The quiet world outside their rays, meaning these two different colors of light, the quiet world outside their rays receded far away and ceased to be. And the talk, the wonderful talk, flowed on. Or was it speech entirely, or did it pass at times into song, chanty of the sailors weighing the dripping anchor, sonorous hum of the shrouds in a tearing northeaster, ballad of the fisherman hauling his nets at sundown against an apricot sky, chords of guitar and mandolin from gondola or kike. I'm not sure how that's pronounced. C-A-I-Q-U-E. I ran across one. I don't know. It's obviously a kind of boat. Did it change into the cry of the wind, plaintive at first, angrily shrill as it freshened, rising to a tearing whistle, sinking to a musical trickle of air from the leach of the bellying sail? All these sounds the spellbound listener seemed to hear, and with them the hungry complaint of the gulls and the sea mews, the soft thunder of the breaking wave, the cry of the protesting shingle. Back into speech again it passed, and with beating heart he was following the adventures of a dozen seaports, the fights, the escapes, the rallies, the comradeships, the gallant undertakings, Or he searched islands for treasure, fished in still lagoons, and dozed day long on warm white sand. Of deep-sea fishings he heard tell, and mighty silver gatherings of the mile-long net, of sudden perils, noise of breakers on a moonless night, or the tall bows of the great liner taking shape overhead through the fog, of the merry homecoming, the headland rounded, the harbor lights opened out, the group seen dimly on the quay, the cheery hail, the splash of the hawser, the trudge up the steep little street toward the comforting glow of red-curtained windows. Lastly, in his waking dream, it seemed to him that the adventurer had risen to his feet, but was still speaking, still holding him fast with his sea-gray eyes. "And now," he was softly saying, "I take to the road again, holding on southwestwards for many a long and dusty day, till at last I reach the little grey sea town I know so well, that clings along one steep side of the harbor. There, through dark doorways, you look down flights of stone steps, overhung by great pink tufts of valerian and ending in a patch of sparkling blue water. The little boats that lie tethered to the rings and stanchions of the old sea wall are gaily painted as those I clambered in and out of in my own childhood. The salmon leap on the flood tide. Schools of mackerel flash and play past quaysides and foreshores. And by the windows the great vessels glide, night and day, up to their moorings or forth to the open sea. There, sooner or later, the ships of all seafaring nations arrive, and there, at its destined hour, the ship of my choice will let go its anchor. I shall take my time. I shall tarry and bide till at last the right one lies waiting for me, warped out into midstream, loaded low, her bowsprit pointing down harbor. I shall slip on board by boat or along hawser, and then one morning I shall wake to the song and tramp of the sailors, the clink of the capstan, and the rattle of the anchor chain coming merrily in. We shall break out the jib and the foresail. The white houses on the harbor side will glide slowly past us as she gathers steering way, and the voyage will have begun." And there is a picture of the sea rat in his sou'wester, I believe that kind of coat and hat are called. As she forges toward the headland, she will clothe herself with canvas, and then, once outside, the sounding slap of great green seas as she hails to the wind, pointing south. And you will come too, young brother, for the days pass and never return, and the south still waits for you. Take the adventure, heed the call, now ere the irrevocable moment passes. 'Tis but a banging of the door behind you, a blithesome step forward, and you are out of the old life and into the new. Then, some day long hence, jog home here, if you will, when the cup has been drained and the play has been played, and sit down by your quiet river with a store of goodly memories for company. You can easily overtake me on the road, for you're young, and I am aging, and go softly. I will linger and look back, and at last I'll surely see you coming, eager and light-hearted, with all the south in your face." The voice died away and ceased as an insect's tiny trumpet dwindles swiftly into silence, and the water rat, paralyzed and staring, saw at last but a distant speck on the white surface of the road. Mechanically he rose and proceeded to repack the luncheon basket, carefully and without haste. Mechanically he returned home, gathered together a few small necessaries and special treasures he was fond of, and put them in a satchel, acting with slow deliberation, moving about the room like a sleepwalker, listening ever with parted lips. He swung the satchel over his shoulder, carefully selected a stout stick for his wayfaring, and with no haste, but with no hesitation at all, he stepped across the threshold just as Mole appeared at the door. "Why, where are you off to, Ratty?" asked the Mole in great surprise, grasping him by the arm. Oh, goodness, we've gone out of focus again. "Going south with the rest of them," murmured the rat in a dreamy monotone, never looking at him. "Seawards first and then on shipboard, and so to the shores that are calling me." He pressed resolutely forward, still without haste, but with dogged fixity of purpose. But the Mole, now thoroughly alarmed, placed himself in front of him, and looking into his eyes saw that they were glazed and set, and turned a streaked and shifting gray. Not his friend's eyes, but the eyes of some other animal. Grappling with him strongly, he dragged him inside, threw him down, and held him. The rat struggled desperately for a few moments, and then his strength seemed suddenly to leave him, and he lay still and exhausted, with closed eyes, trembling. Presently the Mole assisted him to rise and placed him in a chair, where he sat, collapsed, and shrunken into himself, his body shaken by a violent shivering, passing in time into a hysterical fit of dry sobbing. Mole made the door fast, threw the satchel into a drawer and locked it, and sat down quietly on the table by his friend, waiting for the strange seizure to pass. Gradually the rat sank into a troubled doze, broken by starts and confused murmurings of things strange and wild and foreign to the unenlightened Mole, and from that he passed into a deep slumber. Very anxious in mind, the Mole left him for a time and busied himself with household matters, and it was getting dark when he returned to the parlor and found the rat where he had left him, wide awake indeed, but listless, silent, and dejected. He took one hasty glance at his eyes, found them, to his great gratification, clear and dark and brown again as before, and then sat down and tried to cheer him up and help him to relate what had happened to him. Poor Ratty did his best, by degrees, to explain things, but how could he put into cold words what had mostly been suggestion? How recall for another specific... Poor Ratty did his best, by degrees, to explain things, but how could he put into cold words what had mostly been suggestion? How recall for another's benefit the haunting sea voices that had sung to him? How reproduce at second hand the magic of the seafarer's 100 reminiscences? Even to himself, now the spell was broken and the glamour gone, he found it difficult to account for what had seemed some hours ago the inevitable and only thing. It is not surprising, then, that he failed to convey to the Mole any clear idea of what he had been through that day. To the Mole, this much was plain. The fit or attack had passed away and had left him sane again, though shaken and cast down by the reaction. But he seemed to have lost all interest for the time in the things that went to make up his daily life, as well as in all pleasant forecastings of the altered days and doings that the changing season was surely bringing. Casually then, and with seeming indifference, the Mole turned his talk to the harvest that was being gathered in, the towering wagons and their straining teams, the growing ricks, and the large moon rising over bare acres dotted with sheaves. He talked of the reddening apples around, of the browning nuts, of jams and preserves and the distilling of cordials, till by easy stages, such as these, he reached midwinter, its hearty joys and its snug home life, and then he became simply lyrical. By degrees the rat began to sit up and to join in. His dull eyes brightened, and he lost some of his listless air. Presently the tactful Mole slipped away and returned with a pencil and a few half-sheets of paper, which he placed on the table at his friend's elbow. "It's quite a long time since you did any poetry," he remarked. "You might have a try at it this evening instead of, well, brooding over things so much. I've an idea that you'll feel a lot better when you've got something jotted down, if it's only just the rhymes." The rat pushed the paper away from him wearily, but the discreet mole took occasion to leave the room, and when he peeped in again some time later, the rat was absorbed and deaf to the world, alternately scribbling and sucking the top of his pencil. It is true that he sucked a good deal more than he scribbled, but it was joy to the mole to know that the cure had at least begun. And there is the rat, the water rat, sucking on his pencil as he begins his writing therapy, I guess you'd call it, for lack of a better term. Oh my goodness, I'm out of focus again. Chapter 10. We got enough time to start this one, so I'm going to. Chapter 10, The Further Adventures of Toad. Toad. We used Toad in many ways in my family after this because, as I've said to you, this became a family thing. So people would be called silly old Toad or ridiculous Toad or you self-important Toad. And it was always with a capital T implied, meaning not just calling somebody a toad like any old toad, but it was very much based on Mr. Toad and his bragging and his silliness and his getting carried away in things. Chapter 10, The Further Adventures of Toad. The front door, who, by the way, if you didn't hear the last time, Toad had escaped from jail in the garb of a washerwoman with the help of the jailer's daughter, and then had to leap off a train as they were being pursued by police and various other official-type toad-catching folk. The front door of the hollow tree faced eastward, so Toad was called at an early hour, partly by the bright sunlight streaming in on him, partly by the exceeding coldness of his toes, which made him dream that he was at home in bed in his own handsome room with a Tudor window on a cold winter's night, and his bedclothes had got up, grumbling and protesting they couldn't stand the cold any longer, and had run downstairs to the kitchen fire to warm themselves. And he had followed on bare feet along miles and miles of icy, stone-paved passages, arguing and beseeching with the bedclothes to be reasonable. He would probably have been aroused much earlier had he not slept for some weeks on straw over stone flags, and almost forgotten the friendly feeling of thick blankets pulled well up round the chin. Sitting up, he rubbed his eyes first and his complaining toes next, wondered for a moment where he was, looking round for a familiar stone wall and a little barred window, then, with a leap of the heart, remembered everything. His escape, his flight, his pursuit. Remembered first and best thing of all that he was free. Free. The word and the thought alone were worth 50 blankets. He was warm from end to end as he thought of the jolly world outside, waiting eagerly for him to make his triumphal entrance, ready to serve him and play up to him, anxious to help him and to keep him company, as it always had been in days of old before misfortune fell upon him. He shook himself and combed the dry leaves out of his hair with his fingers, and, his toilet complete, marched forth into the comfortable morning sun, cold but confident, hungry but hopeful, all nervous terrors of yesterday dispelled by rest and sleep and frank and heartening sunshine. He had the world all to himself that early summer morning. The dewy woodland, as he threaded it, was solitary and still. The green fields that succeeded the trees were his own to do as he liked with. The road itself, when he reached it, in that loneliness that was everywhere, seemed like a stray dog to be looking anxiously for company. Let me read those last two sentences again, because those are the particular syntax is complicated, and I think I was confusing. He had the world all to himself that early summer morning. The dewy woodland, as he threaded it, was solitary and still. The green fields that succeeded the trees
were his own to do as he liked with. The road itself, when he reached it, in that loneliness that was everywhere, seemed like a stray dog to be looking anxiously for company. Toad, however, was looking for something that could talk and tell him clearly which way he ought to go. It was all very well when you have a light heart and a clear conscience and money in your pocket, and nobody scouring the country for you to drag you off to prison again, to follow where the road beckons and points, not caring whither. The practical Toad cared very much indeed, and he could have kicked the road for its helpless silence when every minute was of importance to him. The reserved, rustic road was presently joined by a shy little brother in the shape of a canal, which took its hand and ambled along by its side in perfect confidence, but with the same tongue-tied, uncommunicative attitude towards strangers.
"Bother them," said Toad to himself. "But anyhow, one thing's clear. They must both be coming from somewhere and going to somewhere. You can't get over that, Toad, my boy." So he marched on patiently by the water's edge. Round a bend in the canal came plodding a solitary horse, stooping forward as if in anxious thought. From rope traces attached to his collar stretched a long line, taut but dripping with his stride, the further part of it dripping pearly drops. Toad let the horse pass and stood waiting for what the fates were sending him. With a pleasant swirl of quiet water at its blunt bow, the barge slid up alongside of him, its gaily painted gunwale level with the towing path, its sole occupant a big stout woman wearing a linen sunbonnet, one brawny arm laid along the tiller. "A nice morning, ma'am,"
she remarked to Toad as she drew up level with him.
"I dare say it is, ma'am,"
responded Toad politely as he walked along the towpath abreast of her.
I dare say it is a nice morning to them that's not in sore trouble, like what I am. Here's my married daughter. She sends off to me post-haste to come to her at once, so off I comes, not knowing what may be happening or going to happen, but fearing the worst, as you will understand, ma'am, if you're a mother too. And I've left my business to look after itself. I'm in the washing and laundering line, you must know, ma'am. And I've left my young children to look after themselves, and a more mischievous and troublesome set of young imps doesn't exist, ma'am. And I've lost all my money and lost my way. And as for what may be happening to my married daughter, why, I don't like to think of it, ma'am."
"Where might your married daughter be living, ma'am?" asked the barge woman.
"She lives near to the river, ma'am," replied Toad, "close to a fine house called Toad Hall, that's somewhere hereabouts in these parts. Perhaps you may have heard of it." "Toad Hall? Well, I'm going that way myself," replied the barge woman. "This canal joins the river some miles further on, a little above Toad Hall, and then it's an easy walk. You come along in the barge with me, and I'll give you a lift."
She steered the barge close to the bank, and Toad, with many humble and grateful acknowledgments, stepped lightly on board and sat down with great satisfaction.
"Toad's luck again," thought he. "I always come out on top." "So you're in the washing business, ma'am," said the barge woman politely as they glided along. "And a very good business you've got too, I dare say, if I'm not making too free in saying so." "Finest business in the whole county," said Toad airily. "All the gentry come to me. Wouldn't go to anyone else if they were paid. They know me so well. You see, I understand my work thoroughly and attend to it all myself. Washing, ironing, clear starching, making up gents' fine shirts for evening wear. Everything's done under my own eye." "But surely you don't do all that work yourself, ma'am?"
asked the barge woman respectfully.
Oh, I have girls, said Toad lightly. 20 girls, or thereabouts, always at work. But you know what girls are, ma'am. Nasty little hussies. That's what I call them.
So do I, too, said the barge woman with great heartiness.
But I dare say you set yours to rights, the little trollops. And are you very fond of washing? I love it, said Toad. I simply dote on it. Never so happy as when I've got both arms in the wash tub. But then it comes so easy to me. No trouble at all. A real pleasure, I assure you, ma'am. What a bit of luck meeting you, observed the barge woman thoughtfully. A regular piece of good fortune for both of us.
And I think I'll leave it there. So, as you can tell, Toad has just gotten himself into trouble all over again with his bragging and his nonsensical stories that don't need to be told. Toad, Toad, Toad. You silly, silly Toad. Anyway, I am going to wrap it up for the night there. I thank you, as always, for the pleasure of your company. I will continue. We're getting down near the end of the book. You can sort of see where we are here. We've got about maybe a quarter of the book left. I have no idea what we're doing after that, but we'll figure that out when we get there. We will try not to get ourselves in trouble along the way, like Mr. Toad always does. So, with that, I say, take good care of yourselves, all of you, very important. Take good care of your friends and loved ones. Help out anybody else you can who looks like they might need it, because lots of people do. And I will see you very soon, next week, as far as I know. I know of no reason I should not. So, I will see you then. Until then, take good care of yourselves. Peace, and good luck, and good wishes to all.